I've been asked to participate in a panel here in my local community on the topic of revenge, retribution, reparation, and reconciliation. The thinking would be that there would be me as representing Buddhism, and then there would also be a Mormon, a Christian, a humanist, and a person of the Jewish faith. And we each would have 10 minutes, which is a very short period of time to address those significant topics. And frankly, I wasn't real keen on the topics. I sort of half-heartedly suggested that it should be changed to empathy, compassion, forgiveness, and love, but that didn't fly. So I have developed some verbiage here, and I plan to actually read it because, I want to stick to the 10-minute time limit, which apparently when people do these kinds of things, they often go over, and I didn't want to just talk off the top of my head. So what I'll do is I'll read this to you for what it's worth, and I'll put ultimately the citation for the various sources that I used down in the description, although I may not do that this evening. It may be tomorrow before I get to that. And even though I'm not going to articulate a title, I've kind of juggled the four concepts, and in my paper here, I've called it reconciliation, revenge, retribution, and reparation from a Buddhist perspective. So when I start reading, you can put the Google timer on for 10 minutes, which is how I...
10 minutes, and we're starting now.
Well, did you hear the Google timer? Hey, Google, stop timer.
All right, cancel.
Okay. So, in India, some 2,500 years ago, the historical Buddha, called Sakyamuni, taught about forgiveness and reconciliation by means of the following parable. These two are fools. Which two? The one who doesn't see his or her transgression as a transgression, and the one who doesn't rightfully pardon another who has confessed his or her transgression. These two are fools. These two are wise. Which two? The one who sees his or her transgression as a transgression, and the one who rightfully pardons another who has confessed his or her transgression. These two are wise. The scriptures of the early form of Buddhism, based upon the teachings of the historical Buddha, were written in the Pali language. The Pali word for forgiveness also means the earth. A mind like the earth is non-reactive and unperturbed. Forgiveness thus implies no retaliation, no revenge, no resentment. It doesn't mean liking the other person, but it cuts the cycle of retribution. It is a gift given without having to understand what the other person has done. Reconciliation, on the other hand, means a return to amicability. It requires the reestablishing of trust. If I deny responsibility for my actions, we can't be reconciled. To regain trust, I have to show my respect for you and for our mutual standards of what is and is not acceptable behavior. I have to admit I hurt you and that I was wrong to do so, and I have to promise to exercise restraint in the future. As the Buddha said, it is progress on the Buddhist path when, seeing transgression as such, one makes amends in accordance with the Buddhist teachings and exercises restraint in the future. In later Buddhist scriptures, written in Sanskrit around 100 to 400 AD, a so-called Mahayana, or Great Vehicle school of Buddhism, was established. The basic belief in this school is that absolute reality is non-dual. That is, it is our discriminative thinking which artificially breaks down the absolute into categories such as this versus that, you as separate from me. From this perspective, no person or thing has an existence that is totally independent from the rest. The whole notion of I, me, and mine is considered to be an illusion. As mystics in all major religious traditions have realized, the Mahayanists point to a mysterious interconnectedness and interdependence that cannot be fully described by any words or concepts. The ideal character within Mahayana Buddhism is that of the Bodhisattva, or Buddha-to-be. Experiencing the insight into interconnectedness, he or she realizes that it makes no sense to pursue enlightenment only for his or her own sake. Thus, a profound vow is taken to forego one's own enlightenment or attainment of Buddhahood until all other beings can be, quote, saved. That is, until their suffering can be completely relieved. I was first drawn to Mahayana Buddhism shortly after a spiritual awakening experience in 1979 at age 31, which was outside the context of any religious tradition. I thought I could perhaps follow the Bodhisattva path. I subsequently realized I was incapable of conforming to the rigor of that path. With the assistance and guidance of an elderly Buddhist laywoman in my community, I fairly quickly evolved toward an other power, faith-oriented sect in Mahayana. Yet to this day, I continue to be awed by the altruism embodied in the ideal of the Bodhisattva. In relation to the topics of revenge and retribution, I want to highlight the fact that compassion is fundamental to the Bodhisattva's practice. How can the Bodhisattva feel anything other than compassion toward his fellow beings, given the reality of interconnectedness? He feels toward all beings as if they were himself. This is how D.T. Suzuki characterizes the Bodhisattva's way of thinking, quote, "If I am to be completely free from all woes, let them also be so. I cannot leave them to their fate. I must save them from the innumerable pains they suffer, even if it means I were to be cut up into pieces many times over." Thus, the Bodhisattva harbors no uncharitable feelings toward others, and he or she has no thoughts of hardship for self. Their essence is a loving heart for all beings, even though they have, from a metaphysical point of view, no independent self-substance. Their compassionate heart has no ulterior motives, and, like the sun, their heart shines equally on the righteous and on the unrighteous. As you can see, there is no room here for revenge or retribution. As for reparation, Buddhism has, perhaps justly, been criticized for having an overemphasis on personal cultivation rather than social action. In recent years, however, a new form of so-called engaged Buddhism is emerging as a result of the efforts of leaders like the Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh. The emphasis in this budding movement is to advocate for peace and human rights. That said, Thich Nhat Hanh cautions, quote, "You cannot prefabricate techniques of nonviolent action and put them into a book for people to use. If you are alert and creative, you will know what to do and what not to do." Close quote. Given this general guidance, it only makes sense to try to find ways of making amends for wrong or injury done, which is the definition of reparation. I now want to share some relevant teachings from my own faith-based Mahayana Pure Land Buddhist lineage, which will take my comments to a more spiritual level, but hopefully still be seen as having some relevance to our topic. I recall reading that spirituality can be characterized as our relationship with the divine. Given the personality and perfections that most of us have, how then can this most important relationship achieve reconciliation? At least that was my dilemma back in the day. We Shin Buddhists believe in a certain cosmic Buddha called Amida, the Buddha of infinite light or wisdom and infinite life or compassion. The story goes that when Amida was a bodhisattva eons ago, he made a vow that we humans could be assured rebirth in his pure land by merely entrusting in him. The following excerpt from the volume called Tannisho describes the power of Amida's vow vis-a-vis our own negative attributes. Quote, "The primal vow of Amida makes no distinction between people young and old, good and evil. Only the entrusting of yourself to it is essential, for it was made to save the person in whom karmic evil is deep-rooted and whose blind passions abound." Close quote. So it is completely through his power, his gift of grace, that reconciliation comes to fruition. I want to close by further elaborating this more spiritually oriented viewpoint using words attributed to Shinran, the 13th century Japanese teacher who refined the Pure Land form of Buddhism to its ultimate degree. And by the way, although pretty much unbeknownst in the West, it was this form of Buddhism, with its devotional orientation toward Amida Buddha, that over the centuries has had more tens of millions of adherents than any other form of Buddhism. In any case, Shinran taught that, quote, even a good person can attain birth in the Pure Land, so it goes without saying that an evil person will. Though such is the truth, people commonly say, quote, even an evil person attains birth, so naturally a good person will. This statement may seem well-founded at first, but it runs counter to the meaning of the other power established through the primal vow, because a person who relies on the good that he does through his self-power fails to entrust himself wholeheartedly to the other power, and therefore is not in accord with Amida's primal vow. But when he abandons his attachment to self-power and entrusts himself totally to other power, he will realize birth in the Pure Land. It is impossible for us, filled as we are with blind passions, to free ourselves from birth and death through any practice whatever. Sorrowing at this, Amida made the vow, the essential intent of which is the attainment of Buddhahood by the person who is evil. Hence, the evil person who entrusts himself to other power is precisely the one who possesses the true cause for birth. Accordingly, even the virtuous person is born in the Pure Land. So, without question, is the person who is evil.